Wesker poured another cup of steaming coffee into his mug. The feeling of the warmth had curled his hand around the ceramic, while the other placed the pot back on the burner. When he turned to exit the break room and stopped, tearing his pager go off, he scanned the digits across the screen and placed the device back in his pocket, shrugging off the mad scientist that had been pestering him all day. Chris Redfield darted across the room with his female companion. No, they would not make it much further, but definitely stirred something within Wesker, like an old specter, having to be disturbed from their resting place, an old memory purposely forgotten of how it's brought to light. Seeing Chris now, Wesker couldn't help but smirk. They were two sides of the same coin. They both lost pawns in every game they played, the only difference being Wesker could care less. He looked like Wesker, even more so if they stood side by side. He wangered. His hair wasn't blonde, however, more of a red rust. Perhaps auburn if more squinted. Did his mother have that hair? Wesker couldn't remember. He had a scar down his own cheek. Finally something Wesker could certainly relate to, except no one would see his. Some months after the destruction of Raccoon City, Wesker had accompanied the old task, forced disguise the debris cleanup crew. The aftermath was horrific, although he had expected much. He remembered the black backwater type town was bustling, with locals out-of-state crowds around, and now become a wasteland where remains of the dead ceased to exist. He adjusted his gas mask. Thankfully, he did not have to breathe in those harmful chemicals or materials still lingering in the air. And walking, he had no map to get around. He would get a map anyhow? The only site he'd be looking to take notice of was that crater that remained. A reminder to the world of Umbrella, forced to the government would do. Wesker was for sure there were still survivors before the impact, and even if he had a heart at all, it would have still gone out to them. But he didn't. He wasn't there to mourn or pay his wishes, not in traditional senses anyway. After walking for some time, after having made several changes in the direction of his path, Wesker stopped and looked down. Here, he was sure, Nest lay in the ruins by run beneath his feet, along with the ashes that highly contaminated gunk from the experiments that undoubtedly had been left behind when William. Wesker looked to the sky, briefly taking his thoughts somewhere else. No, William was not up there, surely. He was sure in his own good way, yes, but was always having a hand of creation since Wesker could remember. But he pushed it too far this time. Nothing more than a few DNA samples now. With a sigh, Wesker produced a garden shovel from his tool belt and began to dig. The only hole went down for a good 6 inches before Wesker stopped. He placed the shovel back on his belt and pulled out a small plush size of his palm from his jacket. A unicorn made by the palm of Frankenstein. Wesker told himself at one point that it was amusing. Then William got red in the face about it, and Wesker had only good time reminded him. Now this plush only served as a reminder of what life once was. It was haunting and casting whatever was left it away like it, but it was the only way he could rid of himself for doing good. Wesker gave the unicorn one last look over and plopped it into his resting place with his boot. He pushed the dirt that had been dug up into the shallow grave, pressing down firmly so it packed nicely, stepped away. It was done. The tiniest shackles that had been hauled on were gone. He would leave his past there, buried in the same soil poor unicorn lay low in. Now he could move forward without looking back. With a small nod, Wesker turned his heel and walked away. Jill had always been tough as nails, as the saying goes, beautiful and nicely shaped, but had means to lash out and put you in your place if you've pushed her. Wesker remembered fondly. It was Valentine's Day in the same year as Stars would meet her end just a few months. Of course, Wesker was in no mood for the holiday, let alone commercial that one capitalized on people's definition of love. What a waste, he'd say. Leave it to Jill, a host small gathering in the Star's office, soaking up the attention everyone gave her about just being her day. Bowls full of foil-wrapped chocolates scattered around chalk-tasting hearts with sappy words on them with every member's desk. Wesker included. He refused to indulge and would place the bowl next to Barry's desk to keep it out of sight. Barry never uttered a word. He eventually took the hint and just let his captain do his thing. This didn't sit well with Jill. At first, she chided Barry for taking some sweets for himself, Especially he had promised that he had cut back on her junk for the new year. Good old Barry kept to himself, and now the second bowl of chocolates got there. Wesker made a mental note for later. That dreadful day came. Wesker stepped in fateful mourning to the entire office, his own included, decorated with hearts of all sizes, Cupid cutouts. He refrained from letting his shoulders slump down and moved to the office. He nodded at everyone present. He noticed Chris in particular expression, as though he was about to laugh. Wesker furrowed his brows and ignored him. Once inside his office, he immediately noticed a card on his desk. His first instinct was to sweep it into the trash can by the end of his desk, but the tiniest bit of curiosity won over him. He sighed and picked it up, splitting the near heart sticker that was sealed to cut shut. It read, "To the Grinch who stole Christmas, whose heart size grew 3 sides today. If it's not Christmas, I appreciate you in any way. To end hard ass that doesn't quit, even for a while, do yourself a favor and learn to fucking smile. Happy Valentine's Day." Wesker felt his body go up in flames. He flipped the card over numerous times, trying to find a name attached to this so-called Valentine's card. He ducked under his desk and moved the trash to the side, but nothing had accompanied his elementary school piece of work. Who dared they? And the image of Chris, nearly bristling out steams from holding his laughter appear in Wesker's mind, and within a few strides he was out the door, making a beeline for Chris. The laughter was nowhere to be found, and this new steam coming off the captain, and sank back into his chair in confusion. Wesker took the card and ripped it in pieces in front of Chris's eyes. He watched as the cardstock bits fell like snowflakes onto his desk. There, satisfaction. Chris held his mouth open and Wesker was all ready for him, but nothing came out. Instead, his eyes repeatedly darted to someone behind Wesker, although enough indication that he needed just to turn around, and he did, and he was met with a fist to the mouth. His head gave a slight whip to the side, stunning him for a second. Before realizing it was Jill who threw the punch, she stood there red as a tomato, ready to throw another strike, but was stopped by Barry. She fought in his grasp for a second, before storming out of the office in a huff. Chris let out a loud sigh, shaking his head in the captain's direction before going after Jill. The rest of the office stared at Wesker in confusion, most not knowing what had transpired leading up to the punch. Barry offered a shrug and the party awkwardly continued without missing a beat. Wesker had the hand on the corner of his mouth, feeling slight raise of his skin. It tasted like blood, something that hadn't grazed his tongue in quite some time. Wesker had to admit it. It was one hell of it. He supposed it was a lesson he would have taken to heart, but it shouldn't really matter in the end. He smiled. She would be dead in a few months anyway. She was persistent, more so than Chris on a good day, and that was saying something. Wesker didn't want to say no and crush her little spirit. She wasn't a mouse, so she wasn't entirely a pushover, but there was something about her way of confidence bubbled into the surface and make her things go away. And just like that, she was still a kid. Well, in Wesker's eyes. He gave a small basketball photo and had downright forced him to take on one last look before shaking his head and placing it up on the recesses of his drawer. With a slam, he sat back on his chair and let his eyes wander over the ceiling tile. Unlike the other members, who was also received the prints to attack on their cork boards to show respect, Wesker felt rather similarly displayed by copy. By no means he was high in a way of respect. If anything, Wesker felt it was highly inappropriate to be far out of character to have it anywhere near his field of vision. However, he decided to spare her feelings. He'd have tossed the print for the moment Rebecca left his office, but that left the door to do more questions more than he cared to answer. Oh well, she'd forgot about it at some point, as he. Jack Krauser was an interesting man, a military brute brawn and tactical power, whereas as prideful but smelling desperation in the moment Wesker met him for the first time. Like before the others, he sought out Wesker's aid in hopes of having his misfortune turn in his favor. And just like all the others, there was always a price to pay. Krauser stepping through the threshold of Wesker's secret base, the wound on his arm carrying such a scent that the latter practically tasted. His red, like cat eyes, smoldered behind the sunglasses. T. Veronica, to be exact. Wesker had to expect Crosser to mostly be human. In fact, he hadn't mutated much at all, not like Stephen and Alexa did. Funny how the virus came back in full circle, knocking on his doorstep. Wesker sat back in his chair, hands clasped and legs crossed. He knew an opportunity when he saw it. Crosser didn't utter a word. The red dress always stood out as a perfect target. Why she insisted on wearing such obvious color was beyond anything Wesker bothered to think of. Ida Wong was Ida Wong. She completed her missions, paid her handsomely. It was like clockwork. But with the dance there so many times, Wesker was easily able to notice even the slightest misstep, with a wench stuck on the well-oiled machine. Leon S. Kennedy coming to save the president's daughter. Government agent, ex-RPD officer. How delicious. Well-oiled machine might just get along just right. Ida knows the dance as well. She just swears he is not a threat. Wesker can't help but frown in disappointment. Everyone was capable of anything. Wesker had a distaste for luxury where it suited him, but he wasn't the type to flaunt in the face of others. He had a natural air about him. More successful he got, the easier it was to merely let his reputation do the work for him. It was easy as breathing. Excella had extended her slender hand towards him. He reluctantly took her bony fingers in the palm of his hand and shook. And in that moment he sized her up from the wrist to the neck downwards. It was comical. Really, how easy could it be to snap her bones with one hand if he wanted to cause all the diamonds adoring her body to fall from grace? But Excella did really have a chance to begin with? Wesker watched her force a smile, but noticed the trapped lust just behind her feathery lashes. Even the sheer fabric of her gown couldn't hide her. Less tasteful, underwear preference, he couldn't help but smirk. No, she did not. He hated Star's meeting, naming those with irons. He would scream about the incompetence, and that teams weren't identical as they should be. And at the same Blitz's short breath, he patronized Wesker and Enrico for a job well done in the leadership. The two captains would exchange glances occasionally. What a load of shit. In some ways, Wesker was thankful that Irons was smart enough to uphold the Tyrant Chief image, while also understanding saying too much that would have Wesker gain Umbrella involved. It didn't matter to Wesker either way. Irons was more corrupted asshole, and Wesker would merely have to keep the mask on the entire time. That's what the RPD stood for and mattered to him, or what his subordinates, as well as their well-being, at the top of his priorities list. Preposterous! Wesker could only care about having everything look in his favor and nothing more. When Irons was finished within his trade, he looked at the handkerchief from his back pocket and wiped his face down, while everyone looked to their boredom. No one uttered a word. It was when Wesker stood, commanding everyone's attention. He nodded for Enrico to follow, and the rest of the members shortly did so after. Irons started at a new rant, spewing some nonsense about disrespect and walking out during the important briefing, and threatening Wesker with a meeting, to which the Star's captain obliged with pleasure. Enrico looked back at Irons as he did his, later mentioning his red complexion with the instantly turned stark white, and that his eyes were as big as UFOs in the sky. Only Wesker could create that reaction in person. Enrico would make some joke later. Oh, if only he knew.